Okay, so we're starting out this week kind of picking up where we left off. This is where we are as far as the tribulation period. And if at any time you need to stop and ask a question, please feel free to do so that we make sure that everyone's on the same page as we go forward. As I've said in the past, I do have opinions and ideas about things. You may have opinions and ideas that differ from what I am teaching, and that's okay, because some of this is not necessarily subjective, but it is speculation, because you have to kind of put some dots together from the end of Revelation to the beginning. And where we began in Daniel, looking at that 70th week, that's where we are this morning. We're looking at the middle portion of the week, really kind of aiming towards the last half of that. We've talked about what was the breaking point or the middle part of the tribulation period, which was what signifies the breaking or the middle point of the tribulation period? The breaking of the peace treaty, right? That's exactly right. And we talked also about this particular situation here, the abomination of desolation. Now, what is the abomination of desolation? I'm such a good teacher that you all remember so well from, what do you think? I mean, 7 days.
The Antichrist in the temple.
That's right. He builds up it's actually the idol that he puts there in the middle of the temple, which is, it desecrates the temple in the middle half of the tribulation week. I wanted to elaborate very quickly on something that Melissa Edge asked last week at the end of class. And she asked, do I think that the false prophet is a Jew? And I said, yes, I do think he's a Jew based upon several things. So let me explain why I believe that the false prophet is a Jew. Have you ever heard this before in your life? Okay, I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this, but I'm just going to tell you why I said yes. If we look back in Genesis chapter 49 at Jacob's prophecy, and we see there in about, I think it's verse 17, and to kind of set the scene for you here, this is come a time for Jacob to die, and he summons all of his children around his bed. And now you'll remember that all of Jacob's children were the tribes, or the head of the tribes of the nation of Israel. So he's going to say something that to his children that's both prophetical and personal, so that as they are gathered around, he addresses each one of them, not necessarily in birth order, but in order of maybe how he's looking at them. We're not quite certain. He goes down through all of the tribes, or some of the tribes, and when he gets down to the tribe of Dan, he saw something that was almost satanically perverted. He saw in Dan something different than he saw on the rest of his individual sons that were gathered around at this time. And what I think he saw when he looked at Dan was something that was coming up in this judgment age that we're talking about now. And he saw what I believe, and I'm going to preface that statement with that, I believe that he saw into and looking at the Antichrist. And here we have Dan having a huge part in what is going to happen in the children of Israel's future, speaking about what the time is coming, and we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. If you'll notice there in chapter 49, verse 17, I believe, I didn't write it down, but it says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way. Now, the tribe of Dan, the first one that we see to embrace idolatry during this particular time of the tribulation, is going to give none of its ranks to the 144,000 witnesses that we see who are going to preach the gospel in the end time. If you go through and you look at Revelation chapter 7, verse 4 and 8, you'll notice that Dan is not listed in those tribes or in that 144,000. Keep that number in mind, because that's going to come up here momentarily as we go forward in our lesson this morning. 144,000, right? We've already spoken about these individuals once. For some reason, God sealed these individuals to preach to those in the end times of what's going on. So it says it seems that Dan here has some link to the serpent because of that verse we just read. Now, some people believe, like I spoke about last week, that the prophet is going to come from the tribe of Dan. you will remember that we start out, if the tribulation period or if the rapture happened tomorrow, 7.7 billion people to begin with. And by the time you take out the numbers that Revelation has revealed to us, a quarter and then another third, we come down to a point to where we're left with about 2.8 billion people left in the world. And that is if the rapture happened tomorrow, or let's say today. Most of these are going to be those who don't believe, obviously, who are left behind, those who don't believe in Jesus Christ, have not accepted him as his Savior, and it's going to be the Jews, those who have not accepted that Jesus Christ was who he was. Now, that also leads us to believe that if he comes from the earth, which if you look in Revelation chapter 13, the false prophet does come from, and it specifies the earth. And that also has some ties to the Israelite people as well, if you look historically in the Bible. Now, that leads us to those two facts that bring us that Dan is possibly, the false prophet possibly comes from that tribe of Dan. Jacob also said that if you look at kind of the way it went through it, Jacob said that Judah's a lion, Naphtali is the hind let loose, Issachar is a strong ass, and Benjamin is a wolf. But when he gets to Dan, he is a serpent in the path of his people. A serpent in the path of his people. One that is ruling. And he is going to sit in judgment of the tribes of Israel. If you put those together, it seems as though that you might make the tie. I'm not going to just sit here and blatantly say that this is absolutely for certain, but you could make the case that the false prophet comes from the tribe of Dan. Okay, that's all the time I want to spend on it. Any questions before we go forward of why I believe that he very well might be an Israelite or a Jew? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's go forward. At the beginning of the second half of the tribulation period, we're now here at that particular point, Revelation chapter 13, the end of that. After Satan has been cast out of heaven, after his resurrection or recovery, he has become so devilish that the result here is the dragon that we saw in the beginning of chapter 12 has now reincarnated himself in the Antichrist and in the false prophet. He's going to build an idol. He's going to give idol or breathe breath into that idol to give it power to kill those who refuse to fall down and worship it. And setting up this image will be the sign that the Great Tribulation, and I'm going to classify that the first part is the tribulation, the second half of Daniel's 70th week, we're going to call it the Great Tribulation, because if you look in Matthew 24, verse 15, this is the reason I separate the two between tribulation and Great Tribulation. Like I said, you can always feel free to disagree, and that's okay as well. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is that setting up of the idol in the temple, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. And then I kind of go forward here, for then there will be great tribulation, such has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. It's going to be very quick, that as soon as that happens, we're going to see that the Antichrist, or the devil who has been cast out of heaven, now is going to unleash this wrath against, his primary target is going to be the Jewish people. They are going to flee Judea out of the temple, because remember, they put all their hope into the Antichrist up until this point. He has been their protector. We've even had a war possibly between Russia and some of the other nations. Between Russia, and we've had a war between the Antichrist, and the Antichrist has protected Israel at this point. So now, all of a sudden, he's going to break that peace with them, and they're going to have to flee. I read several articles as we were studying this, that this very well could be the mountains out in Petra, where the Israelites will end up. You can speculate all you want, but all we do know is they are going to flee the city of Jerusalem for protection and for their life. So that's the reason I classify the difference between the tribulation and the Great Tribulation. Now, here's where we left off last week. The mark of the beast. So how is he going to enforce this universal compliance of worship? if you'll notice, it says in the last part of chapter 13, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. The only way to enforce universal compliance with worshiping of the Antichrist is to have economic control. Now remember, the economic capital for the Antichrist will be where? Does anyone remember? Baghdad or Babylon, right? We have three capitals set up by the Antichrist in this particular time in history. The political capital is where?
Israel.
No, is Rome. The religious capital is Israel, and now we have Babylon as the economic capital. We're going to call this the Bank of Babylon, for lack of a better word, because we don't know what else to put it. But we do know that economic control will be placed in the middle of Babylon. That's where all of that's going to flow to and fro. So we see in this universal compliance, the only way he can force you to worship him is to make sure the only way you can buy food is if you have a particular currency, are able to have that mark on your hand or on your forehead. Have you heard any speculations on this?
Yeah, the RFID stuff.
Yeah. Kind of interesting, isn't it? To where you place that little chip underneath your hand, underneath your forehead. The reason being is, why do you need a credit card, or why do you need to carry some sort of currency around with you when you could just have it here in your hand or on your forehead and let it scan? Whether that's it or not, I don't know. But yeah, there's lots of theories that go along behind this. But we do know, because of this, that this is going to affect every strata of society, from the very rich to the very poor. You'll also remember that one of the trumpet judgments and one of the seal judgments was poverty in the world. We now have a world that's established to the point to where there's poverty, sickness, things are going on that it is very dire in the entire world. Not just in Israel, not just in the Middle East per se, but it's everywhere. So to be able to buy a loaf of bread, or to be able to buy a cracker, whatever the case may be, you're going to have this mark, right? A cracker. I don't know why I thought about that. And I looked at Ashley when I said that. But you're going to have this mark. All commercial transactions, unless you have the mark, will be completely forbidden. You can almost think that the slogan would be "no seal, no sale," right? Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do anything. You see that a world currency kind of sort of is an idea when we talk about globalism, and we talk about a universal political system, which, if you look back, you can kind of see a little bit of I hate to classify parties because I'm not going to begin on a political stance here, but the Democrats tend to kind of want to do a universal government, a universal economic control of the world. That way it kind of gets everybody on a level playing field, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So we see here that could be a foresight to what might happen in the future. But one thing for certain is you got to have this mark. Now let's talk about this mark. Finally, the mysterious number 666 here is given in Revelation 13 and 18. It says, by it, all people in that day will be able to identify the name of Christ, or name of beast. I'm sorry, the name of the beast. What does that mean? What have you heard about this mysterious number 666?
Bad.
Why is it bad?
Because it represents the beast.
It represents the beast?
I don't know. I'm not very knowledgeable.
That's
on it,
okay. That's okay.
But I know that it, just seeing it on the screen right there, makes my stomach feel funny. If I see it like on a video game or something, I'd make it change or turn it off. So
6 is man's number.
That's exactly right.
7 is God's perfect number. And so when you have it in three in a row, it's
It's the
God
human
defying,
trinity.
It's what now?
I guess God defined, maybe, is how I would classify it, maybe, I don't know.
I take it as the human trinity trying to stand up as the
Satanic Trinity, maybe?
Yeah, the satanic trinity trying to stand up as God Trinity. Because that's what this was all about.
There's a lot of speculation on this number right here. We're going to go into it just a little bit. Tracy, I don't guess my hotspot is turned on, is it? I'll see if I can hook up to the big S Wi-Fi. Here in
Yeah,
just a second.
I'll turn mine on.
Commentators have made astonishing guesses in some sort of vain effort, I guess you could say, to identify living or historical figures as the beast. However, it's generally agreed that that the beast name will be known by a system called gematria. Now you say, what? You can write that down. It's Gematria, gematria. I'm sorry, Matria. I'll write it up here. Gematria. Do what? Gematria. Which, if you look at the Greek and Hebrew languages, the letters of the alphabet do some sort of double duty as figures in a numerical system. So when we look at this, and you see in Revelation chapter 13 at the very end, and it says, so that no one could buy or sell unless they have his mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So let me read that again. No one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is one of two things, the name of the beast or the number of his name. So when we talk about gematria, we talk about a way that we look at Greek letters, and each letter is given also a numerical value. So that when you put them in some sort of number, you're going to get some figure, or you're going to get a total of the figure. So when the name of the beast is revealed, it's going to be recognized because that name, when you add up all the letters, is going to equal 666. Just as the name of Jesus, if you do it, it equals 888. I went back, did a little bit of studying in the mark of the beast here, Nero Caesar. If you look at that, you translate it over into Greek, then you add up the letters and you get the number 666 as well. There's also other names. So this got me to thinking, well, maybe I should do y'all's name and see what it adds up to be. Because I need to know if I'm in the presence of the Antichrist in this room. You will be glad to know mine was the closest to that number. I was kind of concerned a little bit as I started adding it up. I'm like, wow, I need to stop right now. But you can add these up, and you get the beast number as 666. If you'd like to, you can go on and you can see, I think you can do gematria calculator, and you can put your name in, and it will give you the number of it. The next closest was Jacob. You were the next closest. Yours was 490 something, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But you can kind of go through and look to see where it is. Other interesting figures, current figures, Prince Harry. If you look at his number, it comes out to be 666. You can do phrases, you can do a lot of things, but interesting to play with if you get an opportunity to go into it. Just look up gematria calculator.
Did you put your first name on your
I was scared to put my last name in as close as I got to it with just the first, so I said I'm stopping right there.
What was your number?
Okay, Tracy, here we go. This is the reason I had you pull that up. Let me see if I can get it.
You don't need to, because mine's going to be right there with yours.
Right. Yes. Here we go.
So was it the Jewish equivalent or the English equivalent?
It is mine was the Jewish. I did all three of them to make sure when I went through and I did all y'all's names. It was close. Let me see.
It does all three of them if you get on.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm asking, because the Jewish one is super high, and the English one is 618.
Bobby has it pulled up.
Yeah.
Okay, what was the question again?
Which did you use? The Jewish one, the English one, or the simple one?
Okay, so if you, I can tweak this automatically. Mine, mine in English was 456. If you do it in Jewish, it was 1020. Jacob's, his was the next closest, I believe, if I remember. I put everybody's in just to kind of see where we were. Jacob was 656. So I would be careful. He's getting really close, and so I didn't put in middle names either. That could get you closer. So that any others want to know what your number is before we go? Okay, not to chase a rabbit here. Okay, back over here to.
So it does Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
It does this one that I just did. It does Jewish, English, and simple gematria. Is the only three that it does.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right, y'all can go play on that. Let me see if I can get my presentation.
You're gonna get no attention for the rest of the class.
None. Everybody now is looking up what it is, and I can't get my keynote to come back up.
Figure out the enterprise. That's it.
Oh, there's my.
And then add up there, it'll actually show that. Put that name in there.
Just do the first 6.
Okay.
First one, put that, the other half in there.
What did yours come up to be, Natasha?
I don't understand what we're talking about.
666.
Change
They're trying to define how evil you are.
Anyway,
Go back one slide.
go back one slide.
See all them, them was all those letters kind of.
Okay, so your number,
My name has to do with any of this.
it does. What I was saying is that the Antichrist name, whatever it's going to be, the assumption is if his name is Jeremy, that those numbers and letters will add up to 666.
Yeah, that's what we don't know the name of the enterprise.
We don't know, but you could say because his name, which equals, and because of this verse in Revelation, it says which the name of the beast or the number of his name. If you add that up, then you will know that. And of course, this is the Greek alphabet, so there's not every letter on here. You have to translate your name from English to Greek, and then Greek to the numerical value. So as new leaders and figures come up, you can put their name in here and see where it comes up. I love now everybody's like,
Where's the
It's not even
six?
number 6 on your
I was about to say, where's the 6
No,
on
that's what
the?
I was thinking. So how are we equaling 6?
1 plus 5, 2 plus 2
I got that,
plus
thank
2, 3 plus 3.
I was going to get into that. I was like, well, I'm trying to figure out how to say this pretty. If you have 400 plus 100. Okay, but anyway, we're good. We're good. She got the highest degree in the class, but okay. Anyway, let's move on. Okay. The next 2 chapters in Revelation, we take a change in scenery here. John now, and as I told you at the very beginning of the book of Revelation, we go from a current moment to now seeing episodes or seeing scenes in a different time. John now sees in heaven. We go into a scene that he's noticing what happens, but there's some intriguing things that go on in chapter 14 and 15 that we need to discuss before we go forward, because some of this is going to happen currently. Some of this is going to happen at the end of the tribulation period when we talk about the apocalypse, and whenever we talk about the end of the great tribulation period. So, look at this. It says, "Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written." I don't know why it says not on their foreheads. Is that right? I might have mistyped that. It says not
It says in their forehead.
in their foreheads. I apologize. I get to typing sometimes. Written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of the harpists playing their harps. They sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were the redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and the Lamb, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. John now sees these 144,000 people standing before the throne of God on Mount Zion. So this is obviously where is this happening? In heaven, right? So we've met this company before only one time. If you look back in Revelation chapter 7, it talks about the 144,000, which I briefly mentioned earlier. These are the ones that have been sealed, they've been preserved, they cannot be harmed by the Antichrist, and now we see that all of a sudden they're in heaven. We're not told how or when these Jewish believers are caught up to heaven, but one thing for sure is now John sees them here in the middle of the tribulation period, and it says the first fruits of the tribulation harvest in 14 verse 5. Standing now there at the very location that John described when he was looking in chapters 4 and 5, he's standing before God and before these living creatures and before the 24 elders. So what's interesting is they have been raptured to heaven as a separate and distinct body of believers. Isn't that interesting? Why has that happened? I don't know. But it has happened because if you go in sequential order, the next thing that happens is 3 angels are going to fly out and they're going to issue some statements as they fly out. And we know that there's still people on earth, but now he sees these 144,000 people and they are at the throne of God in heaven. Why is that the case? Why did they get raptured separately? I am not certain, but it seems to be, if you look at it in this order, in the context that John sees it, they're in heaven while there's still things happening here on earth. Maybe I did that twice. So next, John sees 3 angels who are sent to earth with 3 special commissions. And we're going to talk about these, at least 3 angels. You could say that there might be 6. It depends upon your interpretation. I'm going to go with 3. And if you say that it's 6, I'll say, okay, we can go with that as well. But we know for certain that there was at least 3 different angels that God sent a message out. The first being, if you look in Revelation chapter 14, verse 6 through 12, he sees them, and the first angel is commissioned to preach the everlasting gospel. He says here in 14, 6 and 7, then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. Why is he preaching to those who are still left behind? Is there going to be a different outcome for these individuals?
Yes, people can still get saved during the tribulation.
Absolutely, Rick. They can still be saved during the tribulation period. Now, we're running out of time here on this because I think once we get to where Babylon falls, there is no more opportunity. There's going to be that last half that this is the last opportunity. And this angel very well might be it. I'm not certain, but you could definitely make the argument for that. So the angel reduces the gospel here. Let me go back and finish reading this. The gospel who dwell on the earth, to every nation, to every tribe, tongue, and people. So he's preaching it to the entire world, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water. So the message is very much the simplest form of the gospel. He is preaching that people should repent, and they should be fearful for the hour that's going to come. So, like I said, this very well may be the very last opportunity through this messaging of this angel to be saved. This is the second half of the tribulation. Let me just reiterate that. Now, the second angelic proclamation that was given here by the angel, it says, and another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Remember what I said, that he is going to enforce universal compliance, universal compliance and worship of the Antichrist through his economy, right? This now justifies that as well, because they have made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. You cannot buy or sell unless you submit to the economic criteria that the Antichrist is going to have instilled upon this earth. You're going to have to be a part of that. So he made them drink of that fornication. So now then, if the first angel's proclamation was good news, we can say really that the second angel's proclamation is great news. So the second angel was sent out to announce the fall of Babylon. This is the first mention that we're going to see of this apocalypse or this in the tribulation, but it is by no means what we're going to see as the last, because when we get to chapter 17 and 18, we spend a great deal of time on the city of Babylon. Now, I told you in the past, Babylon was built, I don't know if it was from the 10-nation federation that it has now become this worldwide economic center. I'm not quite certain how Babylon has gotten built to be such the place that it is, but without a doubt, it is a very important place, economically speaking, to the future of this world. So the proclamation anticipates the complete collapse of the political, economic, and religious system of the beast. I think, keep in mind, I think that this is now looking forward to the end of the tribulation period, to the end of whenever the Antichrist rule, and he's now bound to hell. I think this is when that happens, even though it's in the same and grouped in the same of these other angels. I think now John sees a little bit farther in the future. And so, because all of this is going to fall at the very end of that 7-year period that Daniel has told us about. So, note here, this sounded here, the view of the warning follows like this. For those alive on earth, you're going to have a dire choice to make, and that choice is going to be this. Never mind, that's for the next one. The earth has dire choice. The choice, it is the subject of the third proclamation, and let's read that, and then we're going to stop. The third angel is sent forth. I'm not going to read it. The third angel is sent forth to warn mankind of God's abiding wrath. The issues are now made clear. The alternatives are now unmistakable. You have two choices. You're either going to worship me, cries the beast, or be doomed, or you're going to worship me, cries the Lamb, or be damned. I'm going to say that again. The two choices people will be left with when these three angels go out. You're going to either worship the beast because he's demanding it, or you're going to die, or you're going to see the first angel go out and it says, worship me, cries the Lamb, or you're going to be damned. So two people, two messages will be proclaimed, and you're going to have to make a decision at this point. Here's the vision that follows, that finishes up this. I have to finish this chapter before we go. The visions here are two more. One, to portray the Lord as the reaper of the harvest, so the one showing him that he's trampling out the vintages here where the grapes of wrath are stored. Now this anticipates, I think, again, as we look forward to the final, or John sees forward to the final judgment of the world. And when I think you look at 14 and 20, Revelation 14:20, it speaks of a river of blood that's 4 feet deep, and you could say 200 miles long. I think this is a hyperbole. What's a hyperbole?
Exaggeration.
It's a figure of speech to exaggerate for something of the emphasis. And I think John said this here for our benefit. It says, the way now is cleared for the wrath to be poured out. It's our minds are unable to comprehend the dreadful nature of the time to come, that wrath that God's going to have. It is a time that's going to be filled with smoke from the glory of God. No intercession will be possible, for the time of praying at this point is going to be over. Okay? That gets us to the vial judgments, which are going to start next week. We're going to go through those. I think we can get through those maybe one Sunday. It might take two, but one Sunday, two, and then we should wrap this up, I think, by the end of February and be good to go. I hope it's been so far good. Any questions before we dismiss?
I had a comment.
Yes.
Go back to your Mark of the Beast slide.
Mark of the Beast slide.
Just for future teaching. That's a left hand.
It sure is, isn't it? I did not notice that. Thank you. Leave it to you, Jeff. How many people noticed that was a left hand up there?
It's in a mirror, maybe.
And I also wanted to point out one other thing here, if I can, because this is for Chad and Patrick. Let's see, I put this in here just for that fact.
Come, man. Turkeys.
So the discussion has been, you might have seen it on Facebook, that I don't know. Anyway, you take it as what you will. But I had to do that for Chad and Patrick.
One thing I'll say about Revelation, and we've heard preachers preaching stuff, God is always this old man that's real loving and everything, and it's real hard for non-Christians or other people to come and look at Revelation and things that are in it and say that's the same God. It kind of was me in the beginning too. But whether it be the 144,000 or the testimony by that angel, God, even in that tough time, still gives mercy and an opportunity for people to repent. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the message that's missed out of
all of it.
Revelation most of the time, and God
He's
in
still
general.
calling, still
He's
trying,
always calling.
always calling.
People have to understand that.
Yes, without a doubt. Okay, any other questions, comments? Rick, Becky, I'm so y'all came today. I hope y'all come back.